kitchen, a beautiful place where we make memories and spend time with family and loved ones, preparing meals and enjoying them ourselves. For some of us, it may be a place that we spend time at only out of necessity, whereas for others, it's a place where our creative juices can flow. Today we're going to learn about some different ways that we can adapt our methods around the kitchen environment, so that way we can better manage our pain, and perhaps even add a little bit of sunshine to your day. Now, first of all, it's worth mentioning that if you already have techniques that are working well for you around the kitchen environment, please keep on using those techniques. If it doesn't increase your pain, just like the saying goes, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Let's think about 3 essential principles. We call them the 3 P's. Number 1, we have to think about our posture, how we are holding our body while we're doing an activity. Number 2, we have to think about our positioning. How close are we to the task that we are working at? And number 3, we have to think about pacing. Can we take more time to accomplish that task, to allow our body to have a chance to adapt, to recover, and to limit that pain from increasing? Now, perhaps this kitchen does not look like the one that you have at home, but there are some things to consider no matter what our layout looks like. First of all, we have to think about where items are located throughout our kitchen. So if there's things that we use most often, we want to put them in locations that it's easy for us to access. For example, if we have a slow cooker that we use at least once a week, then do we always tuck it far down underneath everything else? Or do we put it somewhere where we can access it easily? As well, think about our toaster. If it's something that we use every single morning, then try not to put it away somewhere where it's difficult for us to take back out. And if we can even consider leaving it on the counter, that could make it even easier for us. The same is true when it comes to the fridge. The things that we use often, don't put them at the back of the fridge. Put it somewhere where you can access it easily, perhaps on the door or at the front of the fridge. That way our body is not put out of position and we're not risking increasing our pain. Now, I might be a fairly tall guy, but perhaps some of you at home aren't. So what do we do if we have to reach something that's high up on one of the top shelves? Well, here's an idea. Should we do this? You're right. Don't stand on a chair. Instead, get for yourself a stool, something that's sturdy that you'll be able to step up on, to be able to reach. We'll find this to be a lot more comfortable. It allows our shoulders to stay at a nice level. It makes it a lot safer for us to access things that are located high up. I think probably if you took a survey of people, they would say that doing the dishes was one of their least favorable chores to have to do around the kitchen. It's uncomfortable, it takes a long time, and it's hot. We get sweaty when we do it. But when it comes to doing the dishes, there are some things to remember about our posture and our positioning. First of all, as we're standing, check to see what the height of your sink is. When you stand up straight, your fingertips should be able to reach the bottom of the sink. If they can't, then we know that the sink is too low for us, and adjustments need to be made. Adding a grate to the bottom of the sink is an excellent way to be able to raise up the surface to allow our backs to stay up nice and straight, as it prevents the dishes from reaching the bottom of that sink. If we still find that to be an issue, there are other options as well. If need be, we could even use a plastic tub on the side, which we could fill up with water. That will again allow us to keep our posture proper and prevent us from exacerbating our pain. After washing the dishes for several minutes, our back can quickly become fatigued. One thing that we could do to be able to ease our back, for some of us, we could be able to put one foot up on a stool. We may find this to be more comfortable for our positioning of our back. Of course, in most kitchens, there are cupboards underneath the sink. So what we could do, we could open those up and place one foot inside the cupboard, which will again allow that back to take a little bit of a break as it stays in a more neutral position. As well, another option is to be able to pace out our activity. Perhaps we could do some washing at one point, and then a little bit later we can move on to finish off with the drying. Or there's even a better idea. Or what we could do is after something is washed, we could then place it into the drying rack to be able to allow it to air dry. Not only does that save us time, but it saves us energy as well. I don't know about you, but I'm getting hungry. Let's say I wanted to make some pasta. What would be the first thing that I would need? That's right, I would need to put some water on the stove and start to get it boiling. So how would I go about doing that so as to conserve energy and to be able to keep proper posture and positioning? Let's see how. For many people, kneeling down to get something out of a bottom drawer is simply not an option. It's just too difficult. Perhaps our knees can't support it, perhaps it's hard in our back. We just don't have the strength to get ourselves back up. So then, what are some other ways that we could do this? Well, just give me a second here. I'll show you. One second. As you'll see, to make a lot of chores easier, having a stool close by is just the thing that you need. So now to reach into my lower drawer, now I can slide it out to be able to select whichever pot that I would desire. Now some things to think about when it comes to the dishes that we use, try to see if you could find some that are a little bit lighter, easier for us to lift. That way we're not always straining our backs if we try to lift and put things away, or when we go to take something out. So I said that I'm going to be making some pasta, so let's find an appropriate pot. Here's the one that I need. So now that I've chosen my pot to use for my pasta, I need to be able to fill it up with water. Oftentimes we'll place that pot on the bottom of the sink and then proceed to fill it up. But unless we have a lot of arm strength or wrist strength, it can be difficult for us to be able to take it out of the bottom of the sink and over to the stove. So what are the other options that we could use? Well, if you have a double sink, then what you could do is rest your pot on the dividing portion and fill it up from there. Because then we only have to balance it, and it makes it a lot easier on us. So that's option number one. Another thing that we could do is use a pitcher or a separate container that's a little bit smaller that we can make multiple trips back and forth to fill it up, if we find that to be easier for us. Again, if you have a method that already works for you at home, then carry on with that method. These are suggestions. If it works for you, then great. Okay, so now my pot is filled with water. Now how do I transport it though from the sink over to the stove to be able to get it to boil? Well, there's some different ways that we could. Oftentimes we try to carry pots like this, perhaps with two hands, we're holding it. But again, that's very difficult for our wrists, and that can cause a lot of pain, both for our arms, for our shoulders, even for our back. Now, one principle when it comes to lifting is to keep a load close to us, as that puts less force on our spine. So then to be able to carry that over, as the pot is still cold, we could place one hand underneath the pot, one hand on the handle, and then keep it close to our body. This will allow us to be able to transport it safely and to keep us from getting hurt or increasing our pain. So that's one option that we could use. Here's a second option that perhaps you would like, but it only works if you have countertops that connect your stove to your sink. Let me demonstrate. So I have my pot filled up with water. So what I'm going to do now though, I'm going to slide it across the countertop over to the stove. So if I'm not worried about anything scratching, I can simply leave the pot on the countertop But if I am a little bit concerned, I could always place something like a towel or a doily underneath. Maybe I'll use one of these ones here. Put a little cloth to let it slide a little bit easier. And now I can slide that across nice and gently. And then from this point, I can lift that on. Now I'm ready to get it to start boiling. Now for my pasta, I'm only going to need about 1 cup's worth, right? It's just for demonstration purposes. Well, that should be about enough. Whoa, whoa. What have I done? I'm so embarrassed. I just spilt all my pasta all over the floor. What am I gonna do? I have bad knees. I have a bad back. I'm in pain. What could we do? Well, we could get the vacuum. Or probably some of you are thinking that you have a pet. Maybe your pet could just eat it up. This is true if that's the kind of diet that you want your pet to have, dried macaroni. But there are other options. We could use something like this. A long-handled dustpan along with a broom. This allows us to be able to clean up that mess without having to bend over. That makes it a lot easier on us. For some people, what they'll do is if they know that they're going to be coming back with the vacuum afterwards, then they'll simply sweep everything into a designated spot where they can remember, and then they can come back later on to be able to pick it up. Because perhaps at that moment in time they're not able to, but this way nothing gets missed. They know where to get it. Now let's pretend like the pasta is finished cooking. Now what can I do to be able to return that pot back to the sink, to keep myself safe, to watch again my posture and my positioning, and to ensure that I don't waste my food. I worked hard at this. So one thing that I could do if I find that the weight of the pot with the pasta in it is too heavy for me, I could scoop out the pasta perhaps using a utensil like this, a pasta spoon, which allows me to scoop out what I need. That will lighten the load. Then I can wait for the water to cool down before I return it back to the sink. So that is an option. Another thing that I could do is I could use that same method that I used before, where I could put it over onto that doily or that cloth that's on the countertop, and then I could be able to slide that around over to the sink to allow myself to have a nice opportunity to pour it into the colander or the strainer in the sink waiting for me. So that also is an option that we could use. But let's say I don't have a countertop that connects the stove to the sink. Then I could do this. So let's bring that pot back. I'm going to put on an oven mitt. So again, just as that method that we tried before, I have one hand underneath, I have one hand on the handle. I keep it relatively close to my body, of course making sure that I don't burn myself. And then now I can transport that safely over to the sink. So now what we're going to do, we're going to put the strainer in the sink. And to make it easier again on our backs, instead of trying to struggle about trying to carry it and risk spilling it this way, because again, that's putting a lot of force through our arms as we're doing that. Instead, I'm going to keep the pot resting on the side of the sink, and I'm just going to use my balancing act here. I'm going to balance that pot on the edge so that way I can pour it now safely into the strainer in the sink. So again, I'm reducing the amount of energy that I'm using, and I'm making it a lot safer for me to be able to do so. So always think about the adage, don't work harder, work smarter. That's the way to do it. Wait a second, let me do that shot again. Oh yeah, look at that. Let me do that shot again, look at those guns. Wait, is the camera still on? Wait, turn that off, turn that off. I hope you guys don't mind. My wife, she asked me to do a little bit of preparations for supper tonight. I gotta chop this bag of potatoes, a bag of carrots, Actually, I probably have another 20 kilograms of potatoes that I gotta chop all by myself. How am I supposed to do that? I just don't know if I'm ever gonna get all these potatoes chopped. I can't do this on my own. So, I got my cutting board, I got my knife. So I need to try to choose a surface that's gonna allow me to keep myself upright. So they're gonna allow my back to stay straight. I already have problems with my posture as it is. So I wanna try to choose a work height that's gonna allow me to stay nice and tall. So take a look at your counter space. If you find that it's causing you to slouch forward, then we can see that it's too low. Ideally, you want your counter space to be about 6 to 8 inches below your elbow height. If it's too high, then what you may need to do is bring a stool to be able to stand on. If we find it too low, we're going to need to build up our work surface. How can we do that? The joy of cooking. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take my cutting board, I'm gonna place it on top of one of my favorite books, The Joy of Cooking. So by placing that underneath, it increases the work height and allows me to keep better posture and positioning. An excellent idea. Or else if you have multiple cutting boards, you can simply place them on top of each other. That's another way that you could do it too. Whatever works best for you. But you know, after a few minutes, you may find that chopping, even at the right height, is still making you tired. Perhaps your legs are getting fatigued. Maybe there's some other pains that are starting. So this is where we think about the term pacing. So some options are chopping up everything in the morning and then doing the rest of the food preparation later in the afternoon, right before dinner time. Some people as well will use chopped vegetables versus fresh ones, pre-chopped vegetables, which you can buy at the store. As well, some people will have somebody else do the chopping for them. Think about that term, delegating. That's a great area where you can have somebody give you a hand, maybe another family member or a friend. So if we feel like we can't stand anymore at that one area, what we can do is sit down to do the chopping. So we could always move over to the kitchen table. That's a great option. Or as well, let's see if we can set up a makeshift workstation right beside the countertop. I'll show you how it's done. Now this countertop arrangement is not the same as everybody's. This one here actually has a cutting board that comes right out. So as you can see, I've already changed the height by a couple of inches between the top of the counter to where the cutting board is. So that's one way that we could do it. A second way now is if I take my second drawer, here I have all my forks and knives. Now if I have a big enough cutting board, this one is not really big enough, but what I can do, I can rest it right on top of the drawer. So now I have a work surface that's more appropriate to my height. I've customized my own kitchen. Yes, who needs $10,000 kitchen renovations to customize it? All we need is a cutting board and a little ingenuity. So now that I have my cutting board out, I can place that right on top of the drawer. And as I have that collar, I can pull up my chair right underneath. So now I'm close to my work surface if I have a few things that are going on, and I'm able to work in this position while monitoring my posture and positioning. And once my legs feel like I can stand up again, I can again change my position. So the key is really, again, pacing out our activities, making sure that we have enough energy to make it through, and that we're managing our pain. We're taking breaks where we need to. Now many people, like myself, we do not have a dishwasher, so we have to do everything by hand. But for some of us, perhaps we have that luxury. So how can we be sure that we load and unload the dishwasher, and again, watching our posture and our positioning? Well, we think about, again, delegating. Perhaps having somebody else help us with this task may be the best idea, if we have the resources available to do so. If not, here's some helpful tips. First of all, when we have to lean down and look down into the dishwasher, again, we think about our trusty stool. If we can put that close by, that can help to protect our backs. So instead of having to reach down, we sit on the stool. So I'm sitting on my stool at the dishwasher. Now we can very easily slide up the trays to be able to remove the dishes. Now, unfortunately, I don't want to remove these dishes. These are from today. These haven't even been cleaned yet. What is that anyways? Well, maybe tomorrow we'll try this again. But when it comes to using the dishwasher, one thing that's nice to know is that our utensil tray is easily removed. So instead of having to turn and twist to be able to remove them, we can take out that whole tray and bring it over to where the cutlery drawer is. Now oftentimes the problem when it comes to unloading the dishwasher is that as we're using it, we pick things up and we turn and we twist right away to be able to put it away. We don't want to do that. Instead, we can take out one dish at a time, place them on the countertop, and then after we have our piles and we closed up everything else and we put that away, and then we can proceed to put things back on the shelves where they belong. Very important because that helps our posture, keeps us from twisting and torquing our spine, and allows us to help manage our pain. So that way it does not increase on us. Now let me close this up because this stinks. Oh. Now let's talk a little bit about using the stove. What can we do to make sure that we are not increasing our pain while we're working in this sort of an environment? Well, no doubt probably a lot of you at home do not have a stove that opens up to the side like this, one that's nice and raised. Of course, here in the occupational therapy department, to ensure everybody's safety and for people to be able to use it efficiently, we have only the best. But what about you at home? Do you have one like this? I'm assuming you probably don't. So let me take you somewhere where we have an example like this we could use. So this stove here is a little bit more like what we would have at home for most of us. So notice that it opens up from the front. So what can we do to ensure that we keep our posture and positioning appropriate so that way we don't hurt ourselves or make our pain any worse? Perhaps you know this already, but in every single oven, the way that the rack is built is that there's a curve at the back of it so that it can slide out and yet still maintain stability. So notice here, if I slide out my oven rack, that allows me an extra 10 or 12 inches to be able to rest my tray on. So let's say if I was putting in a heavy turkey, or if I was putting in a casserole dish, it would make it a lot easier by pulling that rack out. So we could use something if it happens to be really hot, something like this, a wooden oven rack puller. Just imagine what life would be like if you had one of these babies. So this can allow us to be able to pull it out when it's hot and also be able to push it back in. Hopefully with a little bit more ease than that. Now another thing that we need to consider, as mentioned before, is the size of the dishes that we use. So again, do we need to have that large roasting pan for that turkey? Can we get a smaller one? Or perhaps even just buying the turkey breasts to be able to cook that way? Would that be easier for us to be able to manage? Or if we're making a lasagna, can we, instead of using a big casserole dish, can we instead use 2 little ones? That small little change can make a world of a difference. So it smells like my food is almost ready. So I'm going to take that out now. So after I put on my oven mitts, what I'm going to do, I'm going to ensure that my base of support is a little bit wider than normal, because doing so helps disperse the weight more evenly and helps us prevent injury. So I'm going to widen my base of support, 1 foot in front, 1 in back. Now as I open up that oven door, I'm ready now. So let me grab my trusty oven rack puller. If you don't have something like this, even like a long spoon or something that's not going to melt from the heat would be ideal. You have to pull out that rack a little bit further. So already I've made it a little bit easier for my body to handle. So again, with a wider base of support. Now oftentimes when we go to lift up something, we tend to twist and turn to put it where we have space. But make it easier on yourself. Set up for yourself a cork board, whatever you need in front, and be able to rest it on. That way you don't have to twist and turn or go very far, and thus risk hurting our backs. So you lift it up nice and gently. We'll put it on the stove. Close that back up. Let's take a look what I got here. Some delicious turkey. Oh! Just kidding. But again, remember, if you can delegate that task to somebody else, then all the better. Always keep in mind those 4 Ds, because it's going to go a long way to helping to keep your pain under control. So then whatever it is that you're making, whether out of necessity or out of creativity, make sure that you do it safely and that you keep your pain under control.